come in here at an eagle nest here along the James to collect prey remains after the breeding season. The chicks have already fledged and moved on, and I come in here early in the fall to collect prey remains to see what species the eagles are depending on along the James. Here at this site it seems mostly like catfish, blue catfish. Blue catfish were introduced into the James in the late 1960s, and the population has really grown. And most of the eagle pairs along the James seem to feed a lot on blue catfish, even though it's an introduced species. I'm also collecting feathers. These are shed feathers from the adults. The adults begin to molt at the end of the breeding season, and we collect the feathers in order to generate a genetic library. And so I've been collecting feathers under the nest from the pair for several years now at the same nest to look at possible changes in the adults over time.
Kind of show the feather there a little bit, Brian. Just turn it around and.
So let's talk about what happened in the early turn of the century. I mean, what was it? What brought down the eagle population?
Yeah, the eagles along here, along the James, had a significant population up until somewhere in the 1950s. Still in the 1950s, there were 23 known pairs here along the James. In 1962, Jamestown Island, just near us here, was considered one of the strongholds in the Chesapeake Bay. Had 3 breeding pairs just on Jamestown Island. But by 1972, there was only 1 breeding pair remaining on the James, and in 1975, there were none left. And so there were no breeding pairs along the James River from 1975 through 1978. D.D.T was banned in 1972, and we had our first breeding pair back on the James in 1979, and the population has continued to grow since then. And this past spring in 2013, we had 205 breeding pairs, and Jamestown Island, which hadn't had any pairs between the mid-1960s and 1987, 25 years since a bird was found dead of D.D.T poisoning in 1963. The birds colonized Jamestown Island in 1987, and now we have 5 breeding pairs on the island again.
Is that the sole reason that the population decreased? DDT,
there were a number of early factors. Land clearing, sort of in the Civil War period, certainly reduced the population. Hunting of eagles and collecting of eggs and adults reduced the populations further, up until about the 1930s or so. But it was the introduction of contaminants, particularly D.D.T, and on the James, Keepone was introduced into the entire Chesapeake Bay on the James near Hopewell. It was those chemicals that really reduced productivity to the point where the population couldn't sustain itself, and it was pulled down through attrition. Adults were dying and they weren't being replaced, so the population was declining. So the removal of D.D.T and the banning in 1972 has really allowed for a recovery of the productivity, and the population followed that recovery.
So you look at this area from a very special, unique perspective. So can you paint a picture of, from your perspective, what you would have seen on the James back in during the early settlement of Jamestown? As far as the bird population here, what we would have seen? There
would have been a tremendous eagle population along the James during the colonial period. There were good forests available for nesting, and the fish populations were described to be tremendous. And so those two things really sort of protected foraging areas with great food supply and available nest substrate are really the key for supporting a large eagle population. And there have been periods since that time with broad land clearing that kind of culminated during the Civil War period, where there were virtually no trees in this entire region. And then later with shooting, particularly competition with watermen and also trappers. Eagles love muskrats, and so they would steal muskrats from trappers along the James, and they were shot for that reason. So all of those things, sort of insults, reduced the population down to a low level, and the deepest level was related to the chemical contaminants that we introduced into the James after World War II.
So you said there's 200 breeding pairs right now? So, what's the natural level? How many pairs about should there be in the region you study?
Yeah, we don't know how many pairs were originally on the James. It may have been more than what we have now, but it's pretty clear that we're reaching a point of capacity. We have tremendous density, particularly from Williamsburg up to Richmond. That stretch of the river just seems to be the sweet spot on the tributary. The salinity is low. That's where the anadromous fish spawn. And so those areas are reaching their highest density. They're reaching saturation. And so we're sort of entered into the last chapter of recovery, and that's where the population runs out of space. And we're beginning to see a tremendous boom in the number of adult age birds that don't have space to settle. And so what we're seeing is a lot of combat between those, what we refer to as floaters, adult age birds that don't have a breeding space. We're seeing more and more combat between those birds that want breeding areas and the territory holders. And that's driving up adult mortality again, and probably productivity is driving it down. And so that behavioral interaction is what's going to bring this population into some type of balance with the available space.
What brought you into this profession?
Yeah, I've worked with birds all my life, since grade school.
I'm sorry, I was moving around there. I
Yeah.
want to hear that again. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have worked with birds all my life. I have loved birds since I was in grade school, and really have never wanted to do anything else. We work with birds every day, year-round. We work with all kinds of different birds. We do a lot of eagle work out here on the James. We fly over the James searching for eagles. We work with eagles out in the boats. We work with them on land. So really nothing else that I would ever consider doing.
Where are you from?
I'm originally from West Virginia, so the Appalachian Mountains. Moved to Virginia in the late 1970s and went to school and graduate school, and then returned back to the Chesapeake in 1991 and have been here ever since, working at the Center for Conservation Biology.
How would you describe this area here?
This area is the reason that we came back here in 1991. The Mid-Atlantic coastal plain, particularly Chesapeake Bay, is so rich with birds. It's such a dramatic area for bird conservation. There's really no other place like it on the continent.
So what is it about birds that since grade school and you've been with it ever since then? I mean, what specifically? I mean, what?
They're fascinating, and all the bird species are so different. There's such a interwoven nature to community ecology, and so it's really a lot about interest in wildlife. It's about interest in protecting those species for generations. And so we're in the bird business. We're also in the conservation business. We're concerned about preserving some of these populations in perpetuity. And so it has been a tremendous success story to see the eagles come back here on the James. The James is such a symbol for what we can do as a nation in terms of conservation success.
That's great. This is a question we're asking everyone across the state. What's your favorite place?
Yeah, I'd have to say, when you have some time to think about it, that my favorite place is in a survey plane when we're flying eagle surveys in March. There's something about being able to see the landscape like they do, feel the winds like they do, see the trees that they use. There's just nothing that compares to spending a day in the plane searching for eagle nests.
I didn't think about it like that. It's like their perspective. So here's another one. What's your family history?
In terms of my specific family, I grew up in West Virginia in the Appalachian Mountains, one of 5 children to great parents. All of us do different things. We're all passionate about what we do. And so, it has been great to commit my life to this. They commit their life to other things, be passionate, do something, for the community and for society.
What's in your backyard?
I live here in Williamsburg, so the James River is in my backyard, literally, and so it's great to be able to be close by and to be able to get out here on the water and work and study here on the James.
With it being such a historic location, I mean, does that factor into your research at all?
I think that the James has such a rich history in so many ways, certainly a cultural history that we all identify with, but it also has a tremendous history in terms of its biodiversity. The James is unusual in that the freshwater inputs in Richmond are very close to the oceanic inputs in Norfolk. And so we have a steep salinity gradient, and so there's all of these different communities of marshlands, fish, are all compressed together. And so you get this great diversity in a very small area.